Thank you, Melissa, for the introduction. And Melissa is correct. We are good friends. I actually worked as an intern during my college years for the Knox County Chamber of Commerce. And so it was really nice to have that relationship built with Melissa. I also wanted to thank Blunt Partnership for allowing me to come back and speak again. I didn't run everybody away last year, and so I appreciate the opportunity to come back. And finally, I want to thank you all for coming out today, spending time in June. I was actually surprised that anybody showed up in June in light of vacations, kids being out for school. It's supposed to be a nice day later on. I know there's a 30% chance of rain this morning, but I know later today is going to be busy. So I appreciate the fact that you all skipped work and came out here anyway to learn about hiring and retaining talent and building a modern workforce. Appreciate the introduction. I want to give you one quick slide. I know this is not why you came here to learn about me, but to learn about the generations. A little bit of information about myself. I am an HR business partner at RSI Entech. We're a government contractor, and we work with the federal government to restore land back to public use. I'm also a Knoxville native. I grew up in Seymour, Tennessee, in between Sevierville and Knoxville, and then currently my husband and I live in Powell, just in North Knoxville. Some things that we enjoy doing, we enjoy traveling, and of course we are both drone pilots, and we took that picture whenever we got out of the penitentiary just last year, right? All right, so for our learning objectives for today, there's a couple things that I want to review, and I hope that you all can take away this bite-sized information and actually implement this into your workforce whenever you leave today. First of all, we're going to understand our workforce. Where are we currently at and where are we going? We're also going to define what a generation is and what this looks like in terms of a social science. We're also going to learn about each generation's expectations of work and experiences that they've experienced as a child, the values that they hold, and then we're also going to talk about how we connect with each generation. I was talking with Mark over at the end, and he talks about some of the challenges that he has in his workforce, and so how are we going to actually use what we know about them to bring out the best in them so we can have a great workforce overall. And then finally, we're going to talk about the attributes of an uncommon leader. So what do we actually do with all this information and how we put this into practice? This is going to challenge us as business leaders to rethink how we currently work in our organizations and then bring that to a new level of being an uncommon leader. So we're going to talk about the aspects of that as well. We have one goal today, and I hope you leave with one goal. Our goal today is to understand before we lead. We're going to walk through a lot of experiences that each generation went through during their childhood, and that's so important to understand that before we start making changes and creating expectations for them when we don't even understand them in the first place. So make sure that we keep this goal in mind as we go about the presentation. So a couple disclaimers. So I talked about what we're going to talk about. Here's what this is not going to be. This is not a list of stereotypes of each generation. I'm sure that everybody's tired of being stereotyped, whether you're a millennial, a baby boomer, Generation X. Here's the little buckets and the labels that you should fit in with. We're going to go through a number of attributes that most people have experienced, but this is not going to be a list of stereotypes. Following that, this is not an excuse for any sort of behavior. Each generation has strengths and weaknesses, and we're also going to talk about some opportunities to improve each. And so each generation has ability to grow and change and evolve. And this is also not a crutch to not evolve. You can say, well, my generation's not good at technology, or, I'm part of millennials, so everybody texts. We don't really have real friends, right? They're all on screens. And so this is not a crutch for an excuse for a behavior either. So these are the things that we're not going to be talking about. We're going to look at some challenging things. We're going to look at some positive things. But then overall, we're going to take away the lessons and implement them in the workplace. I also want to talk about the sources. Forgot to get this out. But I used a book for my source. So it's called A New Kind of Diversity, and you can find this on Amazon. I'll also have the link for you at the very end. But a lot of the concepts are pulled from this book, along with some evidence-based management from SHRM and HRCI as well. So those are the sources that we're using today. And the events that we're going to discuss for each generation are actually based in the U.S. And so we're going to talk about some events that occurred, and these are assuming that people grew up in the United States. So just know that that's part of the disclaimers when we go through each of the generations. So I want you to think back from 6 years ago, and this was what the workforce looked like in 2017. We had a pretty good split, and kind of a bell-shaped curve from boomers, Generation X, millennials, and then the post-millennials and the silent generation were on the fringes of the workforce. And so you have a great kind of distribution of the workforce. This was taken from this book, A New Kind of Diversity. It's not in color, so I had to add a little color for it so you can see it. But this is what the projected workforce will look like in 2025 and what it's saying. And so just to summarize the generations here, this starts with the lower age, 16 to 19, the years there. Millennials are going to make, Generation Z is going to make up 11%. Millennials making up 33%, which is what we had in the last chart. Generation Z, 40%. So they are growing and expanding in the workplace. And then the baby boomers, 15%. There's a statistic that 10,000 baby boomers retire every day. And so they are exiting the workforce at a very fast rate. And then we have the silent generation, very, very small, at not even 1%. And so that's what the projection is for 2 years from now and what the workplace would look like. So let's define what a generation is. So a generation is a set of people responding to global events within a time period. This is actually based on a social science, but not an exact science. And so when you do research, who is a millennial? Well, some research is going to say this certain time frame or these birth years. And so there's not an exact science because it's based on history periods. How did these people respond to the pandemic versus this set of people? And so it's based on a social science, which we'll get to, but not an exact science. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the research is going to vary. We are using one consistently throughout this presentation, but if you go out and do your own research as well, you're going to find some variation in those years as well. Tweens are people that are born within the first or last 5 years of every generation. So they're going to share attributes of the current generation as well as the one that's closest to them. Like I mentioned, they share the attributes there. So some social science markers. So we talked about how a generation is defined by the social science. So what are some things that are social science? Anyone have a guess? I know it's 8:30 in the morning on a Wednesday. You what? 9/11. Absolutely. So historical events. Any other guesses? What about changes in culture? Absolutely. Changes in culture. So what is priority for the culture? What laws and regulations have been put into place to redirect people's behavior? What does traveling to this country look like for people that are not from here? What would they say that culture is? And so we have these changes in culture that are also social sciences. What about an increase in life expectancy? As we have new research, maybe in cancer or modern medicine, that gives people a better opportunity at life that would have otherwise passed away at a much sooner age. We have, seat belts that weren't available years and decades ago that help save people's lives, and airbags. And so we have these advancements in technology that are also part of the social science markers as well. We also have the mobilization of society. How easy is it for you to pick up and go somewhere else? Can you work from somewhere else? Probably. Can you work in a different country? Probably. If you jump through enough hoops, get enough visas and passports and get your money transferred, you actually can. Can you move across the state? Absolutely. And that was something that wasn't as common years ago, but we've gotten much more global and much more connected to be able to move from different parts of society. And of course, new technologies and media make things much more quick and efficient. Of course, the evolution of your phone has become much more consolidated when we think about the internet, we think about texting and phones, and so you have these consolidated resources, so you're not having to carry around a huge phone, you're not having to carry around a computer, but the consolidation of these things is also a marker in social sciences as well. So today we're going to talk about the 5 generations in the workplace. And so I want to concentrate on the workplace because I know you all are business leaders, so these are the generations that you're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis. We also have the alpha generation, which the literature is a little inconsistent, but people that are born in 2016 or later. And so that's going to be the newest generation. Of course, they're not in the workforce because they're under the age of 10, so we wouldn't want to employ children under the age of 10. But we're going to be talking about the 5 generations currently in the workforce. So the first one that we're going to discuss is the silent generation. The second one are the baby boomers. The third one is Generation X. We're also going to discuss millennials. And then finally, the coronial or Generation Z in the workplace, a little delay there. So some key influencers of behaviors and values that each generation holds for how they change their perspective on work and how they want to connect with you as business leaders. One is the lifestyle effect. So what is priority in your life? Maybe the priority for me and my husband is one thing versus if you have 5 kids, that's going to be a different priority for how you manage money, what risks you take. If you are retiring and you're on the fringes of your career, you're making the best money, you're going to make different choices than someone who's a new mom or a new dad. And so where you are in your life cycle can also have an influence about how you make decisions as well. The period effects was mentioned, I think you mentioned it about historic events during that time. So what historic events occurred at an early age that shaped your viewpoint on work and what you expect of work? And similar to that is the cohort effects. So important information that occurred during your formative years. As a child, what tragedies did you experience growing up and how has that changed your viewpoint? You had mentioned 9/11 as well. If you experienced that as a 6-year-old, you may not remember that, but you remember your parents' response to that. And so these are things that you're seeing, and we're looking to parents to actually guide us through that. And so our parents, of course, are from a different generation than us, and they're going to have their own personality traits and attributes that's going to be different than our current generation. I want you to think about the role of TV in family life. Each generation is going to be touched by the evolution of TV. And so be thinking of this as we walk through the generations, because we'll be referring back to this. In older times, when it first came out, the TV they had general programs or even radio. The family sat down Friday night, Saturday night, and listened to radio. It was generic programs on TV, maybe the Andy Griffith Show or I Love Lucy. And so it was a general audience that anyone could watch. Later on, the program started to be more segmented by the demographics. So they had cartoons for kids at 9 a.m., there was late night shows or comedy, there was soap operas, and so you start to see this differentiation in how the marketing was targeted towards different generations. You also have a higher need for multiple TVs in the home. How many of you have more than one TV in your home? I think that's all yes, where you have a 1-bedroom house, you have one TV. And so there's a need for this a higher demand for multiple TVs in the home because everyone wants to watch a different program at the same time. What that resulted in is the nuclear family being disassembled. I'm going to go to my room to watch my program. My brother's going to watch cartoons. My mom's going to watch a soap opera, and Dad's going to watch hunting. So is that really family time? Not. Yeah, absolutely not. And so be thinking of this as the evolution of TV and entertainment changed over the generation. Not only do we have segregation into different rooms, but we also have smaller consolidated needs. And so we have a need for smaller and handheld device. You may not watch TV, but your source of news may come from your phone now, or your computer, or your tablet. And so you're receiving information on a much smaller device. You don't really have to be in your room or house. So you can be traveling and get that same information. And so what was general programs decades ago is now consolidated on your smartphone. This further divides the family, and so you don't have as much family time together because that was something that you did as a family decades ago. And now it's a lot of individualized content. I follow Smart News, which is an app on the Apple device, and so you can follow anything from Fox News to ABC, and so you get a whole variety of news, and you can kind of pick and choose which news channel that you choose to receive your content. All right, so the first generation we're going to talk about is the silent generation. So we're going to go through their childhood experiences and then values, and then later on we're going to talk about how we connect with them. So childhood experiences. So this generation was born between 1929 and 1945. So their current ages are between 78 and 94. This generation grew up in very challenging times. They started off their year with the stock market crash. And so again, they may not remember this, but their parents do. And so they're remembering the response of their parents. 1929, like I said, the stock market crashed. There was a run on money. Everyone's going to the bank trying to withdraw that because there is no trust in the banking system. And so you have a very challenging time to start your life off with. Follow that by 10 years of Great Depression, because you have the stock market crash, and then you have a run on money, and then to cap it all off, you have 10 years of Great Depression, followed by the participation of World War II. After that, you have food scarcity. We saw a little bit of this during the pandemic. I know it was toilet paper, but you have meat scarcity. And so I don't know about you, but the price of meat, maybe consider being a vegetarian just to save some money during that time. But you have food overall as a scarcity. And so you have a lot of people turning to their own private gardens and then doing neighborhood distributions. And so they're very resourceful, but there was a huge food scarcity. And that was, pretty evident during that time. We also had high unemployment, nearly 30% at its peak. And so, nearly 1/3 people were out of work. And so that is very hard, especially during that time if you only have a single income provider and they're out of work. You've got mouths to feed, you've got homes to pay off. And so it's a very challenging time to be able to do that in the first place and then not to have a job as well. So very challenging times that they went through. So as they're going through the childhood, this has incorporated values and the value system that they expect from everyone else. During that time, there was no competition to others, and these are the values that they continue to hold at their current age. When everybody's poor, no one's poor. Your friends look just like you. Nobody has money. Parents don't have a job. We all play with rocks and sticks and like oranges for Christmas and candy. And so there is no comparison to others. And so when they look at younger generations that have this competition towards getting in a certain career field, they're not really sure why, because they grew up in a time where everybody had the same thing. But looking back, they're going, yeah, that was a time and depressing, but as a child, they made the most of it. And so they're bringing that value with them to the workforce. They also had a very simple life. If they worked, if they were part of the people who were employed, their parents worked, came home, cooked dinner, maybe went to church. That's about it. And so a very simple life. They don't have nearly the amount of choices of lifestyles that we see today. And so it was probably a 3-part triangle. Again, church, home, family, and that was it. And it was a very simple life, and they were okay with that because they really didn't know anything different. The family and the nuclear family set the values. Because there was a lot of time spent listening to radio, watching programs together, the parents are the ones that actually instilled values. How do we get along with people? How do we say please and thank you? How do we use our manners correctly? Because that was a simpler life, there was so many less distractions that pulled people away from that. And the families are the ones that set the values and the cultures for the children to grow up in. Children learned social skills. When you're playing outside with sticks and rocks, because that's your only toys, you learn to share that. And all the children learn and grew up together. And so you learn how to share things. You learn how to be frugal with your money. And so you learn to build peer relationships among your neighbors, among your school friends. And so the children learn the social skills, and it was not determined by what the culture told them they should learn. They're very conservative in value. I'm not talking about Republican or Democrat. I'm actually talking about a risk-averse group. When you grow up in a time where your parents lost all their money during the stock market, you're pretty hesitant to invest in it as well. And so even when economies would swing back later in the generations, they're still pretty conservative because they don't want to take the risk. They don't want to go through that challenging time again that they saw their parents walk through. And so they're very conservative and risk-averse when it comes to new ideas or even financial risk-taking. They're also very frugal. When you grow up in challenging times, you made the most of what you had. And so if they made it as a child doing that, they probably bring that same value as an adult too. They're not going to spend a lot of money, they're not going to spend a lot of time, and so they made the most of it at a young age, so they probably expect you to also make the most of your resources as well. And then finally, they are grateful. If they've made it this far through all that challenging time, they are grateful to be here, and that is also a value that they expect as well. Baby boomers. So these are people that are born between 1946 and 1964 based on the literature that we're using today. So these are people who are currently between the ages of 59 and 77. So childhood experiences. They began their birth year during the return of World War II. And so this is a very drastic change from what we've seen the prior generation. And so the soldiers are returning, and that's where we get the word baby boom, because we're having all these children during the time. And so they're born during a post-war years. There was a high focus on the family. 2.2 million people got married in the United States in the year 1946 alone. So you have all these soldiers returning, and they are happy to settle down, find a spouse, and have kids. They have been deprived of that because they've been serving their time in the military, and so their focus is on the family. During this time period, there were 76 million babies born. During that time period, of course, we get the baby boom during that as well. You also have a recovering economy, and so the previous generation started out with the stock market crash. You also had the Great Depression, then you had a war, and so they're ready to get back to a lifestyle that was depleted from them in the last generation. And so the economy is recovering. There's quite a bit of consumerism going on. Think about that TV picture that I had a couple slides ago. They have a lot of advertisements now. You should get a better car. You need better soap. You need better vacations. And so you have all these advertisements, and it's incentivizing people to live a better lifestyle than what they currently hold. And so those are the things that are apparent during the childhood of the baby boomers. You also have increased competition. If you're competing for jobs with 76 million other people, there's going to be some competition in that. There's some competition to get the best job, to get the highest salary. As we know in basic economic supply and demand, when you have so many people, the supply, the demand gets very high for those things. There's also space for opinions now. When you have much more disposable time, much more disposable income than the prior generation, you also have higher opinions. So you have a lot of protests, you have a lot of riots, you have assassinations of political figures. And so you have this kind of revolt against the conventional way to do things because we've got space and efficiency that we didn't see in the prior generations. You also have access to information that was not as apparent as it was in the silent generation. And so people can now go on the web when that first came about and actually look up things. They have the news that gave them information that was once hidden in the prior generation. And so you now have access to things. Corporate scandals came out during this time, and it was only through the information accessibility that this generation could access that they even found out about this. And so this starts inching our way towards mistrust in the media, mistrust in the government, because you have information contrary to what leadership is telling you. So the values that the baby boomer generation holds, they also have a lot of life experience, and they do want to share this with the younger generation. I don't know if you've noticed this in your workforce, but it's a great trait to have. But they've got a lot of life experience, from how their parents reacted to how they grew up, to working through the number of opinions and protests, to how they spent money correctly, how they didn't spend money correctly. And so they've got that life experience to share. And so these are people, a great resource within your workforce that you can tap into. They also have an awareness of pitfalls. There's a lot of trial and error that occurred during this time period. And so they can tell you what they did right, what they did wrong, and so use them to pave the way and not make the same mistakes. They do have the life experience that you will not get in a younger generation. And finally, life coaching. We're going to talk about later the younger generations are looking for mentors. They're looking for people to help guide them. These are your life coaches. And I love this generation because they are still able-bodied, that you won't see in the silent generation that are 70s and their 80s. These people still want to travel. My parents are baby boomers. They're out camping right now. My dad plays pickleball, and so he flies the drone, and so that's what he does. But it's neat because he's not working right now. And so he still gets to live this lifestyle. He's still very articulate in what he does, versus I don't know if I can say that 15 years from now. And so the baby boomers are the ones that have the best life experience, still able-bodied to go and travel, to do things, but then also you can reap those benefits to give to the younger generation. The baby bust generation. So Generation X, these are people born between 1965 and 1982. And so currently they are between the ages of 41 and 58. During this childhood, they are living in the shadow of the baby boomers. So baby boomers had overall great experience. The economy was going well, and this is where we start to see it peter just a little bit. And so they're living in the shadow, right? Mom and dad are great. What contribution am I going to have if I'm a Generation X? You have a consideration of children, not an obligation of one. So in 1950, the birth control, the oral contraceptive came out. By the time these people have reached consideration where they're having children, birth control was now an option. And so the family life, you didn't expect to have children. You now had an option to either not have them or delay them. And so the oral contraceptive was something that was big in this generation as well. 1973, what was a major decision that came out? Correct. And so you think about when that came out, what are the considerations that women now have for childbirth or even a family, and how would you redefine what that family looked like? And so the nuclear family of a mom, dad, and children and parents that are married is being reshaped in this generation because of legislation that's come out with new technologies and advancements in oral contraceptives. You now have a consideration and not an obligation to have children. So that's where you get the baby bust, not the baby boom. They also grew up in an unstable economy. Talked about earlier, because of the access to information, the role of TV, people now have access to information, and they're more or less questioning the leadership. Okay, Mr. or Miss Politician, you said this, but are you actually going to follow through? Well, I found information that says you don't. Or you've had some shady background and business deals that you had, and now I start to question this. And so there's kind of this revolt against that, and you have an unstable economy. Again, you have assassinations, you have protests, you have, we're starting to see an influx of mass shootings, and so you have kind of this really unstable economy, and that has shaped how this generation views the world and what they expect from the workplace. You also have family life that is shaped. In the 1980s, where we see an increase in divorce rates, a lot of times parents of Generation X are getting divorced, and so moms are having to enter back into the workforce, and they're not with their kids at home all day. There's a phrase called latchkey children, which are these generations because they have the key to the latch to their home, because they're getting off the bus, walking in the door, starting dinner, starting homework, versus something that you didn't see as much in prior generations. And so the children are more independent because mom and dad are not there till they get off work. You have the two income families that are managing this, and you have a new role of what family looks like. When you have so much divorce during this generation, most people didn't have a mom and a dad that were married. It was a lot of broken families and blended families overall. And so the shape of what the family also changed as well. They were skeptical about leadership. There was a bumper sticker that was pretty much questioning authority because they don't want to go through the conventional way of, yep, I'll just believe everything that's said. And so you start to see this trend towards distrust in government and very skeptical about leadership. During this time, there was 5 assassinations in 4 years, 5 assassinations of 4 political leaders during this time period as well. And so, you know, you have this perception that people really don't like leaders, and that's something that's apparent in this generation. So from that childhood experience, we have values. Realism is number 1. They want to know that you're authentic, that you mean what you say, and you're going to follow through. They've been let down by a series of people that have not fulfilled the promises that they've articulated, whether in public or private, and they can also find information contrary to what you just said. So they're looking for an authentic relationship, and they value that in the workplace. Again, authenticity, building connections that we have, whether it's through church, whether it's through the workplace, and so they're looking for authentic people because they've not really found that growing up during their childhood. They also want balance, kind of a work-life balance. They've seen their baby boomer generation parents have to work so hard because there was such an increase in competition for jobs and consumerism. They don't want to live the life that mom and dad had. They want to say, you know what, I'm working 40 hours and I'm going to live the rest of the week like I want to. I'm not staying over. I'm definitely going to work to live and not live to work. And so there's this demand for a balance in the workplace that we see starting with Generation X. They're also very resourceful, very creative. When we talked about in the previous slide, the latchkey generation that came in, started dinner, and took a lot of autonomy in creating that evening time when mom and dad were not there. And so they're very resourceful for how they use the resources that are given to them. They also have pragmatic wisdom as well that they value. All right, the fourth out of the 5 generation, the millennial generation, so Generation Y. For our research, these are the people that are born between the years 1983 and 2000. As of this year, that makes them between 23 and 40. So childhood experiences of the millennial generation. You have unburdened amounts of student loans and unemployment. The parents of this generation told them, you have to get a college degree no matter the cost. And so they're entering their adult years with mountains of student loans for a job that doesn't need their degree. That's what they're burdened at a very young age with. They're also the digital natives, and so they expect you to have yourself together as a business leader. Is your application online? Because if not, if it's paper, I'm going to go next door and find something else. And so there is a high expectation for this digital space to be taken place. They're also pretty good with their phones and technology, and there's of course other generations that as well, but they are pretty fast on the phones because they grew up with technology that advanced at the same rate that they were. There's also a culture of safety, anything from cognitive to physical to emotional safety, that the parents wrapped their arms around the kids and said, nope, I don't want you to work. Nope, I want to protect you. We get the helicopter moms, the Karens that will call on your behalf. And so there's this culture of safety that has come alongside the millennial generation. And so there's not as much exposure to hard things, to stretch assignments, because of the safety culture that parents have created. Which leads to the regression of life stages. You've always heard the term, I'm going to move back in with mom and dad. And honestly, this is happening. You have this regression of life stages that if you look at the research from prior generations, around this age, people get married. Around this age, people have kids. Around this age, you have retirement. The millennials are going, one, I can't find anybody to marry. Not really my thing. I don't want to do that. And then which puts delaying having kids. Childcare is kind of expensive right now. Can't really find anybody to work. Can't really afford to stay at home. Schools are kind of crazy right now. I don't want to send them to public school. I don't want to send them to private school. Don't really know anything about homeschooling. And so you have this regression of life stage because of this fear that's going on in the culture. You have a lot of people who live alone, who eat alone and travel alone. Huge research on this, that it's a very lonely generation, and you'll see this even more so exaggerated in the Generation Z as well. So you have this regression of life stage. They grew up with politics integrated with culture. I'm sure you all have seen on the news Target and Bud Light, and a lot of these places, they're trying to inundate culture into the way that they market. And so the millennial generation grew up that media has assigned a label to this. It's not about, do I want to go and get a Chick-fil-A sandwich? It's not about, do I want a sandwich? It's about the political beliefs that you should believe. If you shop at Target, this is what you've been assigned to. And so this is the generation that the media told them that you're somehow labeled by your decision. it's not a simple decision anymore, but the media has created this presence for them that says, all right, you Republican or Democrat, conservative or this, you can't just be who you are anymore. The media has created this culture that you have to be whoever they've said you are. We also have adults entering life into a gap. Anybody know what the gap is? It's not an acronym, it's a gap between two things. We've made it, hopefully the coffee has set in at 9:10. So it's actually a gap between confidence and preparedness. Many people in the generation, they're having a quarter life crisis, so right at the year 25. They're entering into jobs that don't pay as much as what college told them it would. They're entering the workforce with $60,000 of student debt with a degree that's not needed. And they're saying, okay, I'm making $45,000. Let me go and research and fact check that to make sure that that is correct. And so you have this confidence that someone told them, whether it was their parents or school teachers, and they get into the real world and they're going, oh, it's not really what they said it was. And so there's a kind of a crisis going on with people right in the quarter life crisis that they're having. So this childhood has produced a number of values. They want open communication. Similar to their cohorts in the Generation X, they want that authenticity. They want you to tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly because they're not here to play around. They also like work-life integration, and this is different from work-life balance. A balance assumes a one-to-one trade-off. If I work longer than 5 p.m. at work, I can't see my family. If I see my family, I can't work longer. And so there's this balance that everyone's trying to find. Work-life integration is different because it's a fluid. And so yes, I'm going to take off early to go to my kid's basketball game, but I'm going to work at 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Maybe I'm a late night owl, and so I'm still doing work for you. I'll still do 8 hours, but it's not going to be between 8 and 5. And so this integration assumes this blended fluidity of work and life, and so making the most of everything. Again, you have information accessibility, and even more so as the generations progress. They are the fact checkers. When you give them a salary of $45,000, they will go out and fact check that to make sure that they're being paid equitable. And so there is no, trying to hide under something. There is no fake equity. They have access to information, and they value that you would do your research and making sure they get equitable pay, equitable practices as well. They also bring energy to the workplace. Creative people, they want to be moving and grooving, and they don't really like a slow pace of life. And so they enjoy having the energy, and they bring that to the workplace, and they also expect that from the workplace as well. They also want connection as well. Depending on when they graduated, if they entered the workforce during the pandemic, if they were already in the workforce, depending on what age they are, they want the human connection. I think a lot of times we think, oh, everybody wants to work remote. I worked remote, absolutely hated it. And so, but I wanted the human connection. And as an extrovert, I'm fed from energy from people. I worked from home, it was a snooze fest. I had lowered standards about myself. I was telling, I think it was Zoe about that. I feel like I ate and snacked all day. And so just don't have a high standard of myself when I worked from home. And that was just me. And so what people are looking for are the connections. And they're looking to make that outside of work as well. So are you putting things in place for them to meet after work? Do you have drinks after work? Do you have fun games after work? And they're looking to have that connection with other people face to face. They're also looking for a connection with you as their boss. We're going to talk about later, there is no expectation of hierarchy. They're looking for you to be not only their boss, but their friend and their mentor and their life coach. And so they have a lot of expectations of you as a boss. They're also pretty creative as well. Similar to other generations that had to be resourceful during times, depending if they did elementary school in pandemic, which is I think too old for this group, but depending if they went through work, whether they went through college, and so they're very creative in the resources that they've been given, and they expect work to be creative in that space as well, that they have the space to create new ideas, and that they're held and they're implemented if they're valid as well. I have an additional slide on millennials. Workplace expectations. I talked about earlier, there really is no expectation from them of the org chart. You see it as a hierarchy of, if you have a problem, you ask your supervisor. If you can't get that done, you go to the next supervisor. There's a chain of command for how you solve problems. There is no chain of command that they see. It is a networking group, and they'll ask leadership things that I'm going, I probably wouldn't have started there. I would have started with my boss, would have started with my friends. And so they don't see the structure and the hierarchy that you and I see it. It's about a networking, and they expect availability. They want to be able to walk in your office if you're a supervisor and talk to you and you're available, not someone I have to call or make an appointment. They want those daily interactions with you as a boss and a business leader as well. They want friends and they want fun. Not so much as Google, but a lot of millennials like the Google workspace. It's got nap pods, it's got laundry, it's got a lot of things that make work not work. And so they also want you to incorporate these things as well as you can. They want to have friends. They want their coworkers to do things outside of work with them. They don't want to just have this boxed in, here's what I do for work, here's what I do at church, here's what I do at home. They want this life integration that not only are you my coworker, but I'm going to meet you for drinks at 5 o'clock. I'm also going to go on a mission trip with you as well. And so they want to have this integration with the people that they work with as well. And so they're looking for friends at work as well. They also want speed and change. Research says with this generation, they need change about 1 to 2 months. Something changes, not daily. They don't want to be stagnant in their job, but they want to have change at a pretty good speed. And so what are you doing as a business leader to keep that person incentivized and keep them motivated at the rate they want to change at? They also want the balance and the flexibility. Similar to our group with Generation X, they want this balance and not so much, I have to be at work between 8 to 5, but actually hold me accountable to objectives that I've got to do. Those are the things I'm held accountable for, not the hours that I showed up and hopefully I'm productive for. So they want to have that balance and that flexibility. If I come in late to work, do I have the opportunity to work over? And so can I integrate this with my current life as well? They also want meaning and mission. They want to know that they're not in a dead-end job. If they are, let's convince them otherwise that they're not. And so think about the mission and the meaning for what your workplace does. How do you make money and get them on board with that? What's the mission or the cause that your company can be a part of, and how can you help them be part of that as well? They also want to have growth and learning. That's one of the common questions that I find with millennials in the workplace. What's their career path here? Where's my next training opportunity? Can I attend the seminar? They want to know that they can grow with your company. And so if you don't have that in place, start thinking about some areas where even your entry-level jobs, your intern jobs, actually turn into full-time employment. Because if you don't have that, they will find another employer who will. And so what are you doing to give them the growth and the learning opportunities that they are expecting? All right, the last generation that we're going to talk about are called the coronial because they came in during the century turn. They're also called Generation Z. And so these people are born between the ages of the years of 2001 through 2015, and they're currently between the ages of 8 and 22. So during this time, during childhood, this was the instant generation. You have Facebook Live, you have news feeds that breaking news could get across the globe in a matter of minutes versus days or, publications be posted in a newspaper. They are used to the instant, things being so instant to them, whether it's phones, messages, Slack, Teams, they can do it all. And so you have these digital natives that they're looking for. Also, they're being born into an era where life is being recorded. Everything's on video now. From this presentation to Snapchat. If I'm a middle school student and I drop my lunch all over myself, someone already has it on Snapchat within 30 minutes and they've already sent it to 15 of their friends. And so they grew up knowing that life is being recorded. There is nothing that I do that somehow cannot be reached by other people. And so they kind of have this perspective of like, okay, anything I put out, that's what it's going to be forever and ever and ever. They are aware of global tragedies. They grew up in a time of mass shootings, protest, a lot of dysfunction really from the government. Do you know how many mass shootings there were in 2019? Anybody want to guess?
84.
Higher. Any other guesses?
220.
Huh?
220.
Higher. Mass shootings in 2019 in the U.S. How many? Higher than 220.
500.
Not as much. It's 419. 419 mass shootings in the year 2019. That's more than one a day. So between the ages of 8 and 22, which would be younger in the year 2019, those are the people that experience this. You'd think we're in a third world country when you have that many mass shootings in a year, but we're not. So they're aware of global tragedies. They're used to school shootings on the news. They're used to a kind of a safety culture about where am I going to go because there's mass shootings everywhere? How am I going to live life in public? And so they're used to this kind of a dysfunctional economy. There's a higher awareness of social justice and inequity. We have pay practices that are being challenged in different states. Our company works in Colorado. The new law states that you have to put the pay band on every job. So it's not a secret anymore. I can't hire you at a lower pay because you're a woman. You have to know that your pay has to meet within the guidelines that I already posted. And so I can't be as subjective in making offers now because of the inequity that is being shown in the media. You also have the pandemic-related effects. So depending on where this generation is, whether they're in middle school, high school, depending on when the pandemic hit, they also had a different change in expectation. They thought they were going to go to school, but now several years ago, it was you got to go to school with a mask. Now you got to learn online. And when you finish school, you hopefully find a job that you have human connections at, not working remotely by yourself. How have sports been changed as well? Maybe I used to go and bring my daughter to ballet, but now they don't have that anymore. Now we just sit on the couch and watch TV. And so they have these pandemic-related effects early on in their childhood versus you and I experience these as an adult. They also have their parents' viewpoint of work. This is also the generation that had safety part of that as well, even more so with the millennials as well. So the parents' view of work, please don't work. That's what they told their kids. And so you'll have a lot of people in this generation that don't want to work because they were never challenged to work. And so that's kind of the dilemma that we're facing as business leaders as well, is how do we create work that Generation Z wants to be a part of because they were never exposed to that at a younger age because mom and dad said it'd be too hard for you. Focus on school, focus on, whatever it is, sports, because we all think our kids are going to be NBA basketball stars. And so that was the priority. And then they go to work, we don't have social skills. And so these are the things that the childhood looked like for Generation Z. And then finally, the last point, they're very vocal about their mental health needs. As you can see in the points above that, you have awareness of global tragedies, the social justice. This can be a lot for anyone to go through, but especially as a young person, teenager in that area. And so they've got a lot of needs for mental health. During the height of the pandemic, 1 in 4 people in Generation Z contemplated suicide. And it's through a series of all these things and these effects that compiled on each other that they decided that taking their own life was the better alternative. And so they're okay to tell you that. They're okay to tell you about a lot of things. And so there's a phrase called bring your full self to work. And they take that literally. They bring their depression, they bring their anxiety to work, they bring their needs to work, and they hope because you're a friend and a boss, they want you to help solve that with them. And so there's a huge emphasis on mental health being vocalized at the Generation Z. So the values that this generation holds based on their childhood, they're the most environmentally conscious people, and they expect for you as an employer to be that as well. Other generations may not have as much of a priority on the environment, but they want to know what you're doing. Do you recycle the waste? Do you shred the papers? Do you take them off? They're going to research your company before they take a job to see what you are doing to be environmentally conscious. They are very aware of what other generations have exploited for natural resources, whether it's gas. They're looking to make sure that they buy a Tesla or a completely hybrid car because their gasoline-powered vehicles are going to be obsolete soon. And so they're looking for employers who are environmentally conscious. They want to support a cause. They want to know why they work and why it's important. They want to support a cause that's bigger than themselves. And so you as a business leader have a role to play in articulating what that cause is. It may not be their cause, it's not animal rights, it's not human rights, but what is it that we do? I forgot which company it is, but they had a slogan that they were a delivery firm, and they said, "We don't deliver brown packages, we deliver promises." It's a deeper cause because people order stuff all the time from Amazon, and it can be anything from sports, basketballs, baseballs and whatnot, entertainment, but then it can also be life-saving devices. Maybe they're ordering a wheelchair and that puts in a brown box. And so you never know what's in these packages, but there's a better sense that the company has communicated to the employees that they deliver promises. No matter what people ordered, if you think it's valid, invalid, whatever it is, there's a reason for why we do business, for why we put things in brown packages, because it keeps life going. And so think about the way that you communicate as a business leader to your younger generations. What is the cause? What's the problem that you are trying to solve? And how can they help you get there? They are also valuing employees who prioritize the mental health. Many employees in this era are looking to you to help them with their mental health needs. Do you give them a day off? Do you help them on your EAP? Do you provide resources for that? And so again, they're very vocal about their mental health needs. And so how are we adapting as business leaders to provide them the resources to bring out the best in them? And so as an employer, be thinking about what are some changes and adjustments that you can make to prioritize mental health. Of course, you all look at dental plans and medical plans, and so you look at these things more of a physical health and an overall compensation package, but think about what resources that you offer for mental health. These are also your fact checkers of the group. They will fact check to make sure that your hiring practices and pay practices are up to standard. And they will find a company that will do that if you are not going to be that. And so they expect equitable hiring practices. They want to know if they didn't get the job, it's not because you somehow discriminated, it's because it's based on a business decision. So they expect you to have refined and really good hiring practice, and you're not obsolete saying, oh yeah, we don't really hire women, we don't really hire older people. They expect you to kind of get with the program. And so thinking about your practices as a business leader, what can you do to really eliminate some of the discrepancies or the subjective areas where you have hiring practices? They're also looking for career building. As I talked about in the last slide, they are looking to have this growth and development, very similar to their counterparts of the millennials. They're looking for the next seminar, the next training. And so if you can get ahead of that, if you can say, hey, here's the ones that's been approved. Here's a budget that I'm going to let you spend per year on developing your leadership skills, your Excel skills, whatever that is. What are you doing as a business leader? And they're going to look for companies that value career building as well. All right, I'm going to take a break for a minute. We're going to do a group activity because everybody loves group activities. All right, everyone needs to find a piece of paper, a full sheet of paper. If you don't have one, find a neighbor who does. All right, everybody ready? All right, so what I want you to do is I'm going to be asking you 5 questions. So I want you to number your paper 1 to 5. Don't do it yet. Down there with 4 spaces in between. So at the top, you're going to put 1, skip 4 lines. 2, skip 4 lines. 3, skip 4 lines. 4, skip 4 lines. So go ahead and number those because I'm going to ask you 5 questions and you need 4 responses per question. Everybody got their numbers assigned? All right, so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be matching the generation to the attribute that I'm going to tell you. So there's a series of responses, and you're going to assign, do I think that's baby boomer? Generation X, Millennial, or Z. So you're going to be using all 4 of these for every question. So for example, let's say I ask you, okay, communication, and here's an example of a response. Do you think that's more baby boomer generation, Generation X, and so forth? And so these are going to be in a linear order, so that's why for one, if you think the first one's baby boomers, you put B. If you think the next response, millennials, you put M. Everybody understand what we're doing? It'll make sense the next slide. All right, question 1. These are your 4 options for responses. Go ahead and assign which generation you think that best fits. So the aspect that we're looking at is called self-awareness. Which generation do you think focuses the best on building their brand? Which one do you think focuses best on filter photos and choosing a persona? Which one is stuck in their ways and says, I am who I am? And which generation do you think is the most cognizant that they will not acknowledge their weaknesses? Anybody get that right? You got it right? One.
I would have thought the boomers and the X were mixed around. The thing is that the weaknesses that's strong.
Yeah. You're talking about these two? I am who I am. When you have the culture where economy is really good, there's really no reason to change. So I am who I am. Generation X, I can't acknowledge my weakness. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, next question. Question 2. Regarding communication with people. Go ahead and use these abbreviations. Which generation do you think wants to make communication interactive, keep it short, keep it real, or give me the bottom line? All right, third question regarding motivating people. How would you assign each generation? All right, next question regarding feedback and evaluations. All right, final question regarding dealing with change. Did anyone get all of those right? 1, 2? Good. Good deal. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So how did y'all do? Was it hard? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times they're very similar, and so they kind of merge from time to time. Sometimes there's a higher emphasis of safety in one, and then it's even exaggerated in the other. And so there's a lot of crossover between the generations as well. So thank you all so much for participating in that. We'll have one more exercise for group activity. I know you're excited about that, so stay with me on that as well. All right, so we're going to have kind of a take it home. So how do we connect with each of the generations? We've walked through each one of the generations' childhood, the values. We've talked about different workplace expectations. So what are you going to do as a business leader to connect better with each generation? Our silent generations, how we connect is that we're humble because they are humble. And so if you come in with an ego that you're somehow have a certain position to get stuff done, they're not really there to accept that. So they expect for everyone to be humble. They're also, they want you to be grateful for what you have. They grew up in a challenging time, and this is a much better lifestyle that they would have. And so they expect the workplace to be grateful and the people that work for them to be grateful. Be a good worker. Have good values that were instilled at them at a young age. They also expect for you to do that as well. So be a good worker, be on time, do what you say. They also want you to be kind. We live in a world that's a lot of internet bullies, and they expect people to be kind and have good manners for things as well. And so that's how we connect. It's really very simple. It seems kind of obvious posting these things, but that's a lot of times things that are overlooked in this generation. Be resilient. They're not looking for people that can't can change with that. They adapted very well as a young age, and so they expect you to be resilient as well as a business leader. Be resourceful as well. They put together a lot of resources in a very challenging time. They expect you to put together a lot of resources in a very much different economy than what they grew up in. Baby boomers, how do we connect with them? Recognize their experience. They have decades of life experience and of work experience that's all in their head, and they want to be able to share that. And so create the space for them to do that. Maybe it's a mentoring program, maybe it's an opportunity for them to speak. How is it that you're going to obtain that experience from them? Because they want to share. So recognize that their experience and what they went through. Show appreciation for their skills. They navigated a lot during these decades. Baby boomers may have children or even grandkids at this point, and so they've got a lot of wisdom in those times, and they're still able-bodied to be able to articulate that. And so make sure that you show appreciation for the skills that they've obtained throughout their decades of work. Allow ownership for something. Depending on where they are at in their career, they may be on the fringes. Don't assume they're going to retire. Give them good, meaningful work still. Don't just say, hey, just because you went part-time, I can't give you something meaningful. What's a project that doesn't have to have full-time responsibilities assigned all the time? Make sure you allow ownership because they have good skills and experience that they can bring to the table. And give them space and the resources to do so. They didn't have to be as resourceful as the previous generation, the silent generation, but they still need space and the resources to keep creating and keep retiring or about to retire in a good place. Give them the opportunity to give back and to coach. Assign them a task that's maybe not work related. Maybe they're in charge of some cause and bring the millennials with them as well because they want to be part of the cause as well. So give them an opportunity to give back to the organization in a meaningful way and give them the opportunity to coach others. Your Generation Z is looking for mentors. These are your mentors in the organization. So make sure you create that space for them. Remind them of their younger years. Sometimes this generation can get very impatient with the younger generations. And so remind them that they were once impatient as well. They were one time consumers of media and they got frustrated with different things. And so remind them and say, hey, I know you're frustrated about this because we've kind of always done it this way, but you were impatient one as well. And so remind them of the younger years and how they got through some challenging times for how they can use that moving forward. The baby bus generation, how we connect with them, create the space for authentic relationships. Remember back in their childhood, they were told one thing by leadership and they didn't follow through. And so they're looking for that authentic relationship to be built. As a boss, they want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they're not afraid of that. Allow them non-conventional hours of work if you're able to do so. These people are in the height of their careers, but they're also balancing children. They're also balancing elderly and aging parents. They've got soccer practice this afternoon, and they have a lot of demands going on. We have that, and then they have, I've got to cook dinner tonight. I'm also trying to squeeze in a workout too. And so these people have a lot of distractions going on, and sometimes the 8 to 5 may not be as workable. And so if your company allows for non-conventional work, whether that's working from home, whether that's a staggered work approach, allow them to do that, especially if they can demonstrate ownership and you're not having to babysit. This is a great generation because they have that at least a decade or two experience, especially if they have young families as well. If you are going to give them structure and say, no, you actually do have to come into the office because we don't really do a remote work, if you have minimal boundaries, keep them very minimal and explain what they are. You know, I'm sorry you can't come in at 9 because we have client meetings that start at 8, or we have clients in Asia, so we've got to get the day started. So this is why we can't do that. So make sure you explain any sort of boundaries and keep them at a minimum. Build a genuine relationship. I can't emphasize this enough, and this is more exacerbated in the later generations as well, but it starts with this one. They're looking to build authentic relationships. They know when pay practices are not correct. They know when hiring practices are not valid as well, and they want to make sure that what they're doing is real and very authentic. Be honest with them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If your company is filed for bankruptcy, they already know this because they already found out through the news. So they're waiting for you to tell them, and the longer you wait to display bad news, that separation and that conflict is created. Furnish a cause to support. Find something meaningful in their work and make sure that they can get a hold of that and they can support that. Influence through your relationship, not through your position. They want to build this relationship with you as a business leader. And they can do things, and if you ask them to do something, it's because you built a relationship with them. They're not because you are their boss or you're the CEO. They put the emphasis on the relationship. So make sure that you've got space created in your workplace to be able to build that connection with them. For millennials, how we connect with them, showcase a cause and a why. This is why you're doing this work. I know it seems a little redundant, but here's what the customer needs. And when you do it this way and correctly, this is what happens. When you don't do it correctly, this is what happens. And so make sure you have that connection to the why for what they're doing. Communicate the importance of their work. Many times they're just starting their career and they're kind of in a job they really don't like as much. And so make sure you communicate the importance of whether it's building skills, whether it's punctuality, because there's a deeper meaning behind a lot of the skills that you develop early in your career. Make sure you communicate the importance of the work that they're doing at an early career. Allow space for sharing ideas. A lot of times we have leadership meetings to solve problems at a business level, but look around who's on your CEO team. If they're not dipping into younger generations, they may have a solution because they are in the most contact with the customers, with the product, with the services, that can give you a quicker idea to that versus you may not be as close to the product or the service or the problem to actually know how to solve it. So make sure that you've created a space for sharing ideas. Something that our company does, we have meetings of the HR team 2 times a week on Mondays and Wednesdays. Anyone can add to this agenda. This is not something my boss creates. There's a space for it, and if I've got something I need to share with the team, I put it on the agenda. Anyone can type in it, any order. And so when we go to the meetings, a lot of it populated by my ideas, my coworker's idea. My boss really doesn't look at it. He puts a quote on it. That's what he does. And we were the ones that run the meetings. And so he has ideas and contributions to put on that. But it's not that something that senior leadership just pushes down, but something that I've created the space for younger generations to add ideas to. Gamify tasks. Because millennials are looking for the fun and games at work, they're kind of looking for a little competition, friendly competition. And so anything that you can make a game, a task, a competition. We got a food drive coming up. Those are not really well attended. Make a competition. The HR team versus the accounting team. Who can bring the most cans in? And that, maybe you get a certain award that goes to a cause. Whatever it is. And so think about some of the ways that you can incorporate some gamification or competition into some tasks. Because millennials are expecting the change and the pace, they expect you to expedite some routine tasks with technology. And so make sure that you've got things in place that if this is kind of a paperwork burden that you have, what sort of technologies and software are you using to be able to use that? Because they're not really looking for a slow employer on these things. But think about how you can expedite these things as well. And then launch mentor programs. Think about the baby boomers that are in your generation that have a lot of experience in life coaches. How can you pair them with millennials and Generation Z? Looking for a life coach to help with mental health issues and give them some guidance before you can't find any good resources. And so think about a mentor program for your company as well. Going back to the expedite routine processes with technology, We took on a big initiative last summer in my company. We've got a number of jobs open, and we have this career page, and it was very disorganized. The jobs were posted by the date they were posted, not alphabetical. So if you're looking for a job, you've got to scroll through this whole list of just random jobs that we had. When you clicked on the job, you read the job description, then if you're interested, you click apply, which gave you to another web page that you've now got to find the job in alphabetical order. Not the most efficient process. I'm even surprised that we even had people apply that would actually do all this craziness. And so I worked with our IT team. They're the ones who post these on the website. And I said, how can we get this streamlined? This shouldn't be this hard to apply to the job. I mean, if this is part of the testing and trial, I don't know what that looks like. So I worked with IT and I said, we can't do this whole post them out of order in chronological, then have to go and find them in alphabetical order, because you have that risk of error typing in the wrong things. And so we eliminated 5 steps in the application process just to even get to that. And it was great. We took that application link, and instead of linking it to another careers page, we linked it to the actual application, which seems kind of like, duh, why didn't you do this before? But no one had ever looked at that as an opportunity. And so think about ways where there's a lot of waste in your organization, especially for something on the front end, like applying for jobs, because you will lose a lot of people if you take 5 steps like we did to get to an application that you've got to find alphabetically, click the link that might be broken. So in the last generation, the Coronials, how we connect with them, affirm the dream and goals that they had. A lot of times they have these big dreams, and then the pandemic really changed that. You know, they've got a dream to be a CEO, and that's okay to have those, but just make sure that you're giving that space and say, hey, I appreciate that you're so motivated to do this. Keep up the good work. And I think a lot of times it can seem a little corny or like, suck it up, buttercup, you know, when it doesn't go your way, but think about how you can affirm those dreams and goals, because they're entering adulthood in a very different time than you and I did. Provide a meaningful purpose. Again, this is part of the Generation X, Y, and then even more so in Generation Z. Provide that meaningful purpose for what you're looking at beyond your scope of work. Provide short-term commitments. This is also the instant generation. And so if you give them a year's worth, a long project to do in a year, it's not really very motivating. But here's a project that's within 1 or 2 months, and you incorporate this as you have time with your other daily tasks. So think about how you can provide short-term commitments for easy successes that help build the resume and build confidence. Discuss the personal values with them. They want to work for an organization that also has the same value alignment that they do. And so what are your personal values? And ask them that, and be open to whatever they have to say and see how that aligns with your business. This can also give you insights into long-term, if they're going to be a long-term employee. Because if you can tell their personal values don't align with your business values, that might be a sign that they may not be here for a while. And build the relationship with them. Again, just like Generation X, Y, and Z, they're looking for an authentic relationship. They want to know what you said is true, and they can trust you with that. And so make sure that you're creating the space for authentic relationships. Something that I love that our president does, she provides pizza about once a month. And we all sit together as a group and just have lunch. We don't have a big break room. Everybody generally eats in their office because we're moving buildings. We're so apart right now. But that's something that she creates the space for an authentic relationship. And she spends maybe $150 on pizza. And she does that once a month. It's a very small cost, but a huge gain when you think about the number of generations in the workforce and how you can make that connection with them. All right, so we've talked about the 5 generations in the workforce. So our generations in review. Every challenge is either a problem to solve or a tension to manage. Each generation comes with preferences and expectations of the work. As business leaders, you will need to choose which hills to die on. I'll give you a lot of information, I'll give you a lot of points. You can't really implement all of those, but pick and choose which ones you think apply best to your business and which ones you're going to implement. Satisfying is about managing each expectation. We went through each generation's expectations Satisfying is just managing those. We may not meet all those, but we're going to manage which hills we choose to die on and which examples we're going to choose to implement. People cannot be disillusioned. There's so much access to news and to resources and fact checking that they know when you're blowing smoke. They know when you're not authentic in your pay practices or your hiring practices. And so this search for authenticity grows for every generation. Conflict is the distance between expectation and reality. So some other things to chew on. With each passing generation, time becomes more valuable. Expectation of convenience and services arise. The demand for meaningful work intensifies, as we talked about. The hunger for options grow. The sense of entitlement increases. And the need for speed and space, or space and speed grow. And the need for customization expands. So we've talked about a lot of things. What is it that you all see that you all can help find a solution to? So what are some other challenges that you all see in the workplace? And do you all have any best practices to share?
Challenges is just finding people with the skill sets that we need in construction. So I need electricians, HVAC, I need carpenters, getting good skilled employees from the younger generations.
Absolutely, absolutely. It goes back to the mountain of college debt. Pursue a degree that's really not needed. And so a lot of people in the construction, laborers, brick laborers, they don't need a degree, but a lot of times you have people with degrees that don't want to do that job. And so that's the childhood that we're trying to extract from that. So absolutely. Anyone else want to share?
I think there's increased demand or emphasis on childcare because extended families are now all across the country not necessarily close to one another. And, I look back at my career and childcare is definitely a hotter issue than it was 25 years ago.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Good deal. All right, one more group participation. All right, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to work in groups, so just people beside you, pairs of 3 probably. So go ahead and meet your neighbor. You're going to be discussing how you solve the world with them. All right, thanks for meeting your neighbor and building that authentic relationship that I preached the whole time. All right, your little trio or quad, however you've designed it, you are consultants for a business. And I'm going to tell you some context about this business. So your role is a consultant. And what I'm going to do after this exercise, I'm going to ask a couple groups to give me their opinion for how you would solve this problem given the information that I told you about each generation. What I want you to come away with as a consultant is 3 things for Maggie. I'm going to tell you who Maggie is. And 3 things for Anton to do differently. So again, you're a consultant. I'm going to call on you, and you need to identify 3 different things Maggie should have done differently and Antoine should have done differently. Let me tell you what this is. Maggie, she is a GM of a restaurant. She is 59 years old, and she's had 30 years of job experience working as a restaurant owner. She has very high standards of her and her teammates who work in the restaurant, the servers, the bartenders, the dishwashers, very high standards for everyone. The company policy is that there are no tattoos on employee. That's the company policy. Anton, a server, he is one of the best employees that she has, and he was hired last year. Anton, who is 25 years old, has a large tattoo on his arm. Maggie called Antoine back to her office after one of the shifts where she found that he had a big tattoo on his arm. Maggie tiptoed around the issue. Hey, Antoine, you're a great employee. You know you're one of my best employees, right? You know that you come to work all the time, and giving a lot of positive acclamation, right? Lots of things right after his shift. He's going, what's the issue? Why did you call me back to the office just to tell me I'm a great employee? There's something up. And he asked, what's wrong? Maggie said, the company policy is that no employees can have tattoos, visible tattoos. Antoine said he had this a year ago when he was hired. It's not like he just got it yesterday. He said, I've always had it for a year. Maggie claimed she didn't see it during the interview, and she was disappointed and wondered why Antoine did not disclose this during the hiring. Antoine reminded her that he was a good employee, because that's what she just said, and has nothing to do with his performance. Why'd you tell me I'm a great employee? What does my tattoo have to do with anything? That's my personal decision that I made however long ago it was. So it has nothing to do with my performance, and you just told me that I'm a good employee. Maggie went on and said, I can't make an exception for you, because this is a company policy. If I make an exception for you, you'll tell your friends, and you want an exception. And then corporate's going to get back with me and tell me that I'm not a very good manager. Antoine didn't care and walked out. That's your scenario. So we think about Maggie, who's the GM, and Antoine. So your role as a consultant, identify 3 things that Maggie could have done different, 3 things that Antoine could have done different. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to discuss in your group, and then be ready to share in 2 or 3 minutes. All right. Hopefully everybody's got some ideas written down. I know we're close on time, so we're going to breeze through the next couple of slides. Does anyone want to share what you've come up with as a consultant? Anybody want to share? Yeah.
Did they share with Antoine the policy? No, it doesn't say.
Yeah, it does not say, and that's intentional.
Okay.
Absolutely. Anyone want to share? You're not doing very good as consultants. I paid you a lot of money with no ideas. Yes, ma'am.
So when it comes to Maggie, we discuss talking about that in the corporate policy in the interview process, just saying from the very beginning, these are the things that we stand for. And it can just be 1 to 2 corporate policies that Antoine's generation might not think of, but then also explaining the why and saying we may have this culture, we may have these reasons against the things in the policy.
Offering to work on a solution.
Absolutely. Great idea. Anybody else?
I think she approached the subject tentatively, which put it on.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
We kind of did that in detail to go back to the report, that first response would have been to construct a portrait of it, especially with the evidence of somebody who is great for your team. You don't want to use that.
Different.
Yeah, we could, as well, like, check off the program, like, maybe,
Anyone else? Great ideas, absolutely. And I intentionally left this example vague so you can insert policies on the front end. And I gave you information about, how she approached the conversation and an area for improvement. So great ideas. Anybody else? Good deal. Well, thank you so much for doing this exercise. That's the last one I'll have you participate in. This is the final slide before we recap. I'm not going to read these to you, but these are the approaches that we can look at to be an uncommon leader. What are we doing currently that's comfortable? Listen when I speak, I have the answer, the same old ways. And how can you transform that into be an uncommon leader for how you take the best practices that we talked about today and incorporate that into the workplace? So I'll give you the opportunity to read this, and then we'll close with the final slide. All right, so what we reviewed today, I hope that you all took away the one goal that we had is to understand before we lead. We defined what a generation was based on a set of people that experienced historical events during a time period, and it's based on a social science, not an exact science. We also talked about how each generation came through childhood and what they valued for each one. We also talked about how we connect with each one of the generation and how we incorporate these practices into our workplace. We also took a quiz, which most of y'all failed at, but we contrasted viewpoints of each generation. And so each generation is going to be viewing a different aspect differently. Feedback, self-awareness, whatever that looks like, we compared and contrasted those. And we also looked at new attributes about how to become an uncommon leader. So that's what we talked about today in the hour and a half, and I apologize for going over. If you're interested, again, I found this on Amazon. It's a very easy read. It's called A New Kind of Diversity. A lot of the concepts were pulled from here, along with information from SHRM. If you're looking for more credits, this is a plug for TVHRA. We do offer credits for SHRM and HRCI as well. So make sure you come and attend a SHRM meeting with us. We meet on the second Tuesday of every month at Rothschild's Catering in Knoxville. And that is all that I have for you today. Thank you all so much for being attentive and participatory and spending your June here skipping work, and hopefully you all have a great day. Thank you.